Corwin tripled his income over 15 years. Genuinely tripled it. 3 promotions, and a job change that doubled his salary outright, in a single afternoon, with one signature. I asked him, at the end of those 15 years, what his net worth had done in that same stretch. He didn't know. He had to go and check. He came back about 10 minutes later, and he was quiet for a moment, and then he told me it had barely moved. 15 years. 3 times the income. Almost exactly the same person, financially, as the one who started. Back in the very first episode, I told you that Shift 1 was setting a floor, not a ceiling, on frugality. Corwin's story is what happens when nobody ever tells you the floor is allowed to stay where it is, even when your income doesn't. Corwin was 26 when he took his first serious job. Logistics coordinator for a regional distributor. The salary was modest and he knew it was modest, and he told himself, the way most of us do, that the number was temporary. That the answer to every financial question he had was simply going to be, earn more. And then he did. The first raise came 14 months in. It wasn't dramatic. About 6%, which on his salary worked out to something like $140 a month. And within about 5 weeks of that raise landing, he had moved out of the apartment he shared with 2 other people and into a 1-bedroom of his own. The rent difference was $160 a month. $20 more than the raise. He noticed that at the time. He thought it was funny. It's worth sitting with that for a second, because it's the whole episode in miniature. The raise arrived, and before it had cleared his account twice, it had already been assigned. Not wasted. Not gambled. Assigned. To a perfectly reasonable improvement in how he lived. The second raise came 2 years later and it was bigger, and the car followed within the month. Not an extravagant car. A sensible one, 3 years old, with a payment that fit comfortably inside the new number. Then, for years after that, a promotion to operations manager, and a different car, newer, with a payment that fit comfortably inside that number too. Each one comfortable. Each one, and this is the part that matters, permanent. A car payment doesn't end when the good feeling about the car ends. And underneath the large decisions there was a quieter one running constantly. The restaurants changed. Not to anywhere remarkable, just up a tier, and then up another tier. The groceries changed. The holidays changed. None of this was a decision he ever made once, sat down, and considered. It was 100 small recalibrations of what normal meant, each one arriving quietly, each one staying. Corwin did try, once. Year 6, he built a spreadsheet. Every category, color-coded, a target for each one, and he kept it faithfully for about 9 weeks. I asked him why it stopped and he said something I've thought about ever since. He said it stopped because it was working, and there was nothing in it that ever asked him a question. It told him what he'd spent. It never told him what the money was for. So once he'd confirmed he wasn't doing anything stupid, which he wasn't, the spreadsheet had nothing left to say to him, and he closed it. Then came the job change. A competitor offered him a role that doubled his salary outright. He'd been working toward something like it for a decade. He told me the drive home that evening was the best drive of his life, and I believe him, and I want to be clear that I think he had earned it. Nothing in this episode is an argument that Corwin shouldn't have taken that job. Here is what he expected to happen next. He expected that a doubled salary would finally break the pattern. That at that size, the money would simply outrun his life. He had done the arithmetic in his head on that drive home, and the arithmetic said he would be saving something like 40% of his income inside 2 years. That is genuinely what he believed, and it wasn't a stupid belief. His wife, Dellen, saw it more clearly than he did, and earlier, which is common. She told me she'd noticed around the time of the second car that their life kept improving and their situation never did, and that she couldn't work out how both of those could be true at once. She raised it. He didn't dismiss her. They had the conversation, and the conversation was reasonable, and at the end of it they agreed they were doing fine. And they were doing fine. That was the trouble. Fine was exactly the problem, and fine is very hard to argue with. What actually happened was a house with a mortgage size to the new salary, and a second car for his wife, and private school for one child and then two, and a standard of ordinary life that rearranged itself around the new number within about 18 months. By year 15 Corwin was earning 3 times what he'd started at. He was saving, as a share of his income, almost exactly the same tiny percentage he had at 26. The dollars were bigger. The fraction was the same. And the fraction is the thing that compounds. The myth is that the problem was ever the number on the paycheck. It wasn't. It never was. And I want to be precise here, because this is the episode where precision does the most work. For the last 10 of those 15 years, Corwin did not have an earning problem. He had solved earning. He had solved it more completely than most people ever will. If you had shown 26-year-old Corwin the salary that 41-year-old Corwin was drawing, he would have told you that every financial question in his life was answered by it. He would have been wrong, and he'd have had no way of knowing that. What he had was a floor problem. His floor, the cost of one ordinary month of his life, rose to meet every single increase, almost immediately, and then stayed there. That's it. That's the entire mechanism. There is nothing more complicated underneath it. And if that sounds familiar, it should, because it is the exact failure from Marguerite's episode, running in the opposite direction. Hers dropped without limit. She kept cutting, and there was never a line below which she wouldn't cut, so the cutting became the point and it ate 20 years. Corwin's rose without limit. Every increase found a use before he decided what its use should be. 2 opposite-looking lives. Same missing piece. Here's why a floor is so much stickier than it looks. It isn't money, not once it's been in place a few months. It's identity. The bigger apartment stops being a thing Corwin bought and becomes where Corwin lives. The school stops being a decision and becomes where the children go. Lowering a floor means telling yourself a different story about who you are, and people will do almost anything before they'll do that. Which is precisely why the leverage is at the moment it rises, and almost nowhere afterwards. What's missing in both is a fixed line. Marguerite had no floor beneath her, so she fell. Corwin had no ceiling on his floor, so it climbed. Neither of them had ever been told that the line is something you set, deliberately, once, and then defend. Most people are never told that. It isn't taught anywhere, and almost nothing in ordinary life encourages you to work it out on your own. I want to give you the counterexample, because otherwise this sounds like a rule about not enjoying money. Renata's income roughly doubled over the same kind of stretch. Her floor rose too, by about a fifth. She moved once, deliberately, to a place she'd chosen for reasons she could state out loud. Everything else she left where it was, not out of discipline, but because she'd already decided what she wanted her ordinary week to look like and it hadn't changed. She wasn't depriving herself of anything. She simply wasn't being asked by her income what she wanted, over and over, and answering yes each time. And I'd go further. Of the 2 failures, Corwin's is the harder one to see from the inside, and it's the more common one by a wide margin. Marguerite's life visibly hurt. There was a felt cost to it, every day, which meant there was at least a chance she'd notice and stop. Corwin's life got better every single year. Every step up was pleasant. Every step up was defensible. Nobody who cared about him ever had cause to worry, because from the outside a man whose life improves annually for 15 years is a man who is doing fine. The failure produced no symptom. That's what made it durable. So let's put the right number on screen, because it isn't the one anybody watches. The number that actually determines your outcome was never the raise. It's the gap. The distance between what comes in and what your ordinary month costs. That gap is the only part of your income that can enter the unbounded game at all. Everything else is spoken for before it arrives. Take two people. The first earns $60,000 and her floor costs $48,000, so her gap is $12,000 a year. Over the next 15 years her income rises modestly, call it 2% above inflation, and she holds her floor almost still. By the end her gap is closer to $20,000. The second is Corwin. He starts at 60 as well, with a gap of $6,000, and he triples his income, and his floor triples with it, so at the end his gap is still, in real terms, about $6,000. He out-earns her by a factor of 3. She out-accumulates him, and it isn't close. And the numbers here are unkind in a useful direction. If your floor costs $4,000 a month and you hold it still through one raise instead of letting it rise by $400, you haven't saved $400. You've added $4,800 a year to your gap, permanently, for as long as that floor stays put. Over 20 years, invested, that single-held decision is worth more than most people's entire deliberate savings effort. One decision. Made once, in 1 week, about one raise. Run that for 15 years at a reasonable return and the two numbers don't sit anywhere near each other. This is the comparison the whole episode has been walking toward, and it's worth seeing plainly. Put the two numbers next to each other and the argument is over. Her contributions, invested steadily across those 15 years, come to roughly $340,000. His come to about $95,000. The man who tripled his income finished with a bit over a quarter of what the woman who never did finished with. Not because she earned more. She didn't, not in any year. Because her gap was allowed to grow and his never was. And notice what that means about advice. Almost everything you will hear about money is aimed at the left-hand side of that gap. Earn more. Get the qualification, change the job, ask for the raise, start the side business. All of it can be good advice. None of it does anything at all if the right-hand side moves the moment the left-hand side does. You can spend a career winning the argument you were having and lose the one you weren't. Let me be precise about the phrase people reach for here, because I think it does real damage. This is usually called lifestyle creep, and the word creep carries an accusation in it. It suggests vanity, or weakness, or a person buying things to be seen buying them. That was not Corwin, and in my experience it is almost never anybody. What actually happens is far more ordinary. A slightly shorter commute. A washing machine that works. A school you drive past and think, they'd be happy there. Every one of those is a good decision. It's the absence of a line that turns a sequence of good decisions into a bad outcome. So here is the fix, and it's one sentence, and it takes about 4 minutes to set up the first time you ever do it. Every time your income rises, before you decide how your life changes, automate a fixed percentage of the increase into the unbounded ledger. Not after you've seen how the new number feels. Not once you've had a few months to settle in. Before. In the same week the raise is confirmed and ideally before the first larger payment ever reaches your account, because the floor rises to meet money it has already met. That's the same one decision logic from the discipline episode, applied at the one moment in your financial life when your floor is most tempted to move. You are not being asked to be disciplined for 15 years. You are being asked to be deliberate for one afternoon, on maybe 6 occasions across an entire career. Pick the percentage before you know the amount. Half is a strong default, and half is not austerity. Half means every raise you ever get still visibly improves your life, immediately, in a way you can feel. Corwin's first raise was $140 a month. 70 of that into the ledger, and 70 into the apartment, and he would still have moved. Slightly later, or slightly smaller. He'd have had the better place. He'd also have had the gap. Now, if you're listening to this at 45, having had 6 raises already, none of which you allocated, you might reasonably feel that the advice arrived late. It didn't. The rule works on the next one, and there is always a next one, and it works exactly as well then as it would have at 26. What you've lost is compounding, and you can't get that back, and I won't pretend otherwise. What you haven't lost is the mechanism. Every future increase is still in front of you, and every one of them is still yours to allocate before it lands. And that is the through line, running underneath every story in this series. Walt clipped coupons for 30 years and set no floor, so the frugality had no bottom. Priscilla built a cash position that grew and called it safety, so her money had no ceiling to climb toward. Marguerite let the floor fall. Corwin let it rise. In every single case the person was disciplined, hardworking, and sincere, and in every single case the missing thing was the same, a line, set on purpose, and then held. Now, the objection, and it's a fair one, and I'd think less of you if it hadn't already occurred to you. What is the point of earning more if you're never allowed to live any better? That's the question, and if the answer were genuinely never, then this would be a miserable piece of advice and you'd be right to ignore it. A life spent watching a number rise on a screen while nothing around you changes is not a life anyone should be selling you. So let me be exact about what I'm actually claiming. I am not telling you to never raise your floor. I'm telling you not to let it rise by default. There is an enormous difference between those two things and almost everyone collapses them together. Corwin's failure was not that his life improved. It's that no single improvement was ever chosen against the alternative. The apartment was never weighed against anything. It simply happened, because the money had arrived and the apartment was what money is for. 15 years of unchosen improvements will consume any income you can generate, and you will not be able to point to the decision that did it, because there wasn't one. There is one genuine exception and I want to name it, because otherwise someone will hear this and hold a floor that ought to move. Some floors have to rise. A child arrives. A parent needs care. You move for work, to somewhere that simply costs more. Those are not creep, and treating them as failures is a good way to make yourself miserable while achieving nothing. The test isn't whether your floor rose. It's whether you could say, out loud, what it rose for. If you can name it, it's a floor. If you can't, it's a leak, and the difference is not about the amount. Raise the floor on purpose. Once a year, look at it, and decide what you want it to be, and then let it be that. A floor you chose is not the same object as a floor that crept. One of them is a life. The other is a leak. If you want a concrete starting point tonight, it's this. Find out what your ordinary month actually costs. Not what you think it costs. The real number, from the last 3 statements, including the annual things divided by 12, because those are the ones that hide. Write it down. That single figure is your floor, and most people have never once seen it written down, and are genuinely surprised by it. Then 2 questions, and they take about a minute. First, what is my gap right now, this month, in dollars? Income minus that floor. Second, what happened to that gap the last time my income went up? If you can't answer the second one, that is not a failure of memory. That's the answer. It means the increase was absorbed rather than allocated, and it means the next one will be too, unless something is put in its way beforehand. You now know what to put in its way. So, the afternoon. Open the account you already have or open one this week. Set up a transfer that moves on the day after you're paid, not the same day, because the day after is the day the money is real and the temptation is highest. Set the amount at whatever your current gap genuinely allows, even if that number is small, because the amount is the least important part of this. Then write one line somewhere you will see it again: when this number goes up, half of the increase goes here first. That sentence is the entire episode. Everything else has been me explaining why it's hard to keep. Corwin's mistake was about income growing without a plan. There's a related mistake about a home. The asset almost everyone I've ever met assumes is automatically their best investment. It usually isn't, and the reasons are worth walking through carefully. That's next.